So cybersecurity isn't just an IT issue, it's a business issue. And if you work in sales compensation, chances are you're dealing with some of your business's most sensitive data. On this show, we usually talk a lot about everything performance management, from strategy to planning to analysis. But the reality is this: if your data isn't secure, none of that works. And here's a real stat that puts it into perspective: 60% of data breaches come from third-party vendors. That means that even if your internal systems are watertight, chances are the biggest risk isn't coming from inside. I'm your host, Deanna Romanowski, and to help break this down, I'm joined by John Minnix and Tim Mektrakarn, co-founders of Bright Defense.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Bright Defense is a firm that specializes in cybersecurity, and it helps businesses build and maintain strong security programs, ensuring that they meet the highest industry standards and stay protected against evolving threats. They've actually been instrumental in helping us at Innovine strengthen our own security posture. So I'm excited to have John and Tim here to share what businesses, perhaps like your own, need to know about vetting vendors, spotting red flags, and ensuring that their own partners aren't their biggest risk. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Before we get started, can I just get you guys to introduce yourselves really briefly, why you started the firm, what's your background?
Sure. My name is John Minnix. I'm one of the co-founders here at Bright Defense. I guess a little bit about my background. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia. Moved out to Los Angeles in 2003 to go to business school at UCLA. I guess I got more interested in sort of technology and the intersection of technology and business during that time. And I've been working in the IT field for about, I guess, over 20 years now. We started Bright Defense after another venture that Tim and I had for about a decade, along with his brother, that was also doing more managed IT services and cloud services. We exited that firm in 2019. We sold it to a kind of a private equity-backed company. And then we ended up starting Bright Defense a couple of years after. I think primarily based on our experience, working in a small to medium IT business and achieving SOC 2 and other compliance frameworks internally. We saw the challenge that faced for a small to medium business, and we decided that we could take what we learned there and hopefully help other small, medium businesses, startups, growing enterprises achieve compliance frameworks like SOC 2 and ISO 27001.
Yeah, and I'm Tim Mektrakarn. I'm also one of the co-founders here. I lead more of our technical operations. My background, more of a traditional network engineer. We had to get through certification for our own businesses, and so felt the pain going through kind of the audits every year. And so this time around, we wanted to have an offering that was easily accessible by all small businesses and startups to make sure that we have continuous monitoring, continuous control reviews that are on a monthly basis versus just doing your audits like one time a year, and you see little value in that. So we basically started Bright Defense to address this huge gap that's missing in the market.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. Everyone I know in sales comp knows that data security is really important, but it often feels a little out of their hands. So everything you're saying kind of lines up. My hope for this conversation is that we can shed some light on what's happening in cybersecurity today and to give some of our audience a little bit more confidence in knowing what they can do to help their organization keep them safe. When companies think about cybersecurity, they often think about internal policies. But as we've established, most of the threat actually comes from outside. What's the biggest mistake you see companies making when evaluating vendors for security? What are some red flags they should be watching for?
Yeah, some biggest things that customers should be asking their potential vendors is, do you have basic policies, procedures? Do you have an incident response plan? And actually verify it. Like, show me, your incident response plan. Show me what you would do in terms of a data breach. And this is obviously if they don't have any kind of externally audited credential to provide, like an ISO 27001 certification or a SOC 2 report. And so normally we would have these calls with potential customers, vendors that you're trying to work with on a call so that we can gauge their reaction as well and see, if are they lying to us? Do they actually have these practices in place? And you would know by asking different questions, kind of how they respond, and we can determine if they're being truthful or not. And obviously, if they're not being truthful in this process, then, they're probably not a good person to work with. Because trust is a huge component of what we're trying to build in any kind of long-term relationship. one of the biggest red flags that we also see in terms of things that people should be looking into is, shadow IT. And this is basically where employees go off and start signing up for applications themselves and subscription services to things that IT doesn't have control over. And so we have to make sure that that is also brought into the realm of what we're managing.
Interesting. We have a thing called shadow accounting in our industry, but I haven't heard of shadow IT, and that makes a lot of sense.
I
Yeah.
would imagine it's very similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just, I'll just add as well that, a lot of times, customers do a very thorough due diligence process on the front end, on the purchasing side, and they put their vendors through an RFP process. And there's a lot of companies that are just going to check yes. Do you have these policies and procedures in place? They're just going to check yes because they want the business, obviously. And it's up to you at that point as the customer to verify that that yes check mark was actually an accurate statement. And I think that's where, speaking to the customer more in depth, scrutinizing their answers to make sure that you feel comfortable that your data is going to be protected is paramount.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Speaking about companies checking boxes, a lot of companies treat compliance as a one-time thing where they assume because they've checked that box that they are safe, even if they are assuming they are following the protocols that they're supposed to be following. But as the data suggests, apparently that's not fair. Apparently, companies that achieve compliance but don't actively maintain it are actually 4 times more likely to experience a breach. So I have a couple of questions from that. Does compliance create a false sense of security? And what are the biggest gaps that emerge when companies focus more on passing audits rather than actively maintaining their measures?
Yeah, I'll say that from our perspective, our goal is always to leave our customers with a more secure environment and to better secure their business. And we see sort of the compliance as a validation of a job well done and not the end goal. And I think if you go into it with a mindset that you want to improve your cybersecurity posture, you want to up level and upskill your organization and improve your internal processes and maybe your tech stack as well to be more secure, then you're going to come out of the process, with a lot of hopefully value. I think there are some times that customers come into it with, we just want to check this box and we don't really care about security. And typically, that's just the wrong mindset, right? Because, the whole purpose of the compliance process is to be more secure, and you're checking the box to show that you're more secure. So I think from our perspective, really it's all about improving your security posture. We also layer on continuous compliance monitoring so that we're always making sure that we're improving and, continuing to kind of improve our security posture along our customers.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And to add on to what John said, right, we see a lot of customers where the executives aren't brought into the whole process in the very beginning. And that is a big red flag because that means that they don't have buy-in, right? And so when kind of you do that, you don't have executive support from the top down, it kind of trickles down into the entire org, right? So maybe you're doing this compliance program in a vacuum, right? And so we try to make sure that, all the key stakeholders are involved in the whole journey, right? Maybe not every single component of it, but that they're briefed along the way and they're an integral part of where they need to be.
That makes sense, yeah. That touches on my next question. Everybody says that they take security seriously because they need to, but what would be other green flags that communicate that they really do?
Yeah, so having transparency, right? Showing that have continuous monitoring, whether that's through like a trust center. And so if you made the investments in a lot of the compliance automation tools out there, you will have this thing known as a trust center, which is basically a page like a lot of websites have like a status page that show kind of their availability of their services. So this is something very similar. It's showing kind of, do you have policies and procedures written down? Do you have control monitoring? And then if you've gone through certification, you can kind of publish and show off that you have, passed through various audits. And so this helps kind of build trust right away because, you're basically establishing off the gate that you've done things in a manner that have been audited by a third party and you're willing to show it off.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that shows the transparency. And then I would say also, just if you're able to ask your customers questions and scrutinize, and they're able to provide you thorough and timely responses, that's also a great sign. I think if it takes them a very long time to come back with fairly simple answers, and perhaps the answers are insufficient or, not fully formed, then perhaps they're not really taking security very seriously.
Yeah. So ask questions. That's
Ask
right.
questions and get, hope for timely and thorough responses.
Yeah. So let's talk cybersecurity myths and common mistakes next. Most people picture hackers as some sophisticated black hat ops operations, but the reality is that data breaches are often caused by simple human errors. What are some simple but effective things that companies can do to reduce human error?
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that can be done. So when like to think of this as like an onion. So you have multiple layers in your defense strategy. And so this is known as defense in depth. And so you would have multiple layers of security trying to make sure that as impenetrable as you can make it within budget, right? And that's always the biggest problem is like, yeah, with unlimited resources, you can have very strict controls in place, but we try to balance these things, right? And so some small things like making sure that anti-malware is installed into the employee devices, patching is being done, disk encryption. If the laptop were to get lost, that it's going to be very hard to be able to break into the device and get all the data that's on the machine itself. And use a security awareness training, right? That the employees are the biggest risk. And so we need to make sure that we're always training them, keeping them updated with the latest things that are out there, right? Phishing simulations, those types of things.
So I learned from you guys that the average cost of a breach is actually nearly $4.5 million. Beyond the financial hit, what are the hidden consequences? Things that don't show up in an immediate dollar amount or that have a lasting impact on a business.
I would say, even more so than the immediate financial in some respects or in certain situations, is just the reputational harm. If you look at all of these companies that have suffered these big data breaches, it takes them probably months or years, or sometimes they're never able to regain their level of trust that they had previously. So I think it's also important to keep in mind that, every company is probably going to experience some cyber incident, but being able to also manage the scope of that incident and keeping it in kind of small and tight as possible and not letting it spread throughout the organization. If you're monitoring things continuously, you can hopefully keep things very well contained. So maybe one person's machine is compromised, but not the entire organization. So that also kind of helps with the financial and reputational harm aspect.
Yeah, and to add on to what John was saying too, we try to prepare customers for this, right? And usually when we ask the question, "Have you had a security incident?" the answer is always like, "No, we never do." And so it's like, okay, you've never had someone try to send you a fish email, never try to send you spam. I mean, these happen on a daily basis, right? The ones you don't know, the 0-day attacks that are happening. How do you know that you're not being attacked right now? Because they're just sleeping inside your network, right? We try to prepare the response, to what would happen in the unlikely, hopefully unlikely event, right? That you were to get a serious, severe security incident. How can you respond to these things?
Yeah, because apparently it takes an average of 277 days to identify and contain a breach. Why does it take so long? And what is the best way to speed up the detection and the response process?
I would say, the reason it takes a lot of time typically is because people aren't paying attention. So things aren't being monitored, things aren't being patched. We offer a monthly vulnerability scanning service. We're also, when we're working with our customers and we're building out policies and procedures, we're talking about timely patch management. We're talking about, how long does it take you to identify and remediate a vulnerability? Those should all be built out into your cybersecurity program. If these things are addressed on a regular cadence, you're less likely to be breached, and you're also more likely to identify when there's an incident. If you don't have policies and procedures, a lot of times patching and some of the security tasks become when I get around to it type tasks. And that's why it's taking people 100 days, 200 days to figure out that there's a problem.
Yeah, and just like any kind of like robbery, right? Like you can, just smash a window and grab whatever's in kind of the car, right? Or you can take your time to surveil the environment and then really inflict the maximum amount of damage if you were to take your time and plan it, right? And so a lot of the attackers plan for kind of this, right? They're trying to see how big of a breach can I inflict, how much damage can I inflict for the maximum payout that I can get.
Yeah, that makes sense. What's one thing companies do because they think it makes them more secure, but it actually doesn't? And please say mandating password updates because I'm sure many of our viewers are like me and can't handle that.
No, you have to do your password updates, Diana. No, it's very important to update your password, and you probably need a lot of times you need a longer password than you think you need. So 12 characters and more. So that unfortunately is a very important aspect of cybersecurity. But
Yeah, longer, stronger, they say for passwords. But that is kind of one of those topics that's being debated, right? Of like, if you have MFA, do you still need to enforce like password changes every 90 days? We are on the side of like, if you can and your employee base is willing to accept that, then try to push for the more stringent controls that you could put in place, right? Some other weak controls are, people think that like NDAs are a way to protect data. That's one way, right? That's like a legal way to protect your data. But if you're sharing a file, you can put access controls on it, right? If you're sharing it via like OneDrive or a Google Drive, can the person download it? But it's still not going to restrict them from being able to take a screenshot, right? So there's a lot of things that you need to think about like, what is that data that you're sharing and how you're sharing it.
So let's talk takeaways and next steps for business leaders. Based on everything we've discussed so far, what's the biggest misconception you think business leaders have about cybersecurity today?
I think a lot of people think that it's going to be expensive, right? That like, I don't have the budget for this. But your data is also very important to you, right? And that have you ever quantified, what it would cost you if your intellectual property got breached, if your customer data got breached, like John said a minute ago, like your reputation damage, those things, if once you quantify that and you put into the grand perspective of things, like security should be at the foremost, right? That's a big thing that we have talked customers through. But once they work with a partner like us, we try to break it down into something that's like cost effective for them and manageable for the long term.
I think kind of being secure is sort of similar to being healthy, right? So what does it mean to be healthy? Like, well, I exercise regularly, but maybe I don't eat that well. Is that healthy or is that unhealthy? It's probably some sort of middle ground, right, between the two. And so with security, there is no secure. You can be the healthiest person in the world, you can run triathlons, and you can still get very sick, right? You can spend $1 billion on cybersecurity and you can still get hacked. So I think the goal is, let's make smart, reasonable, responsible choices. Let's use our budget wisely. Let's figure out solutions that where, a small business can still afford a level of security. And then let's have some continuous monitoring in place. So when there is an incident, because there's almost certainly going to be an incident, we're able to respond quickly and we're able to minimize the damage.
If you could give one piece of advice to companies looking to improve their security posture, what would it be?
And one piece is tough. I would say, don't wait to get started, right? You can always improve. You can always improve today, right? You can always improve tomorrow. I think a lot of times there's so many areas and facets of cybersecurity that it's tough to get started. Get started somewhere. Get started with some simple policies and procedures. Get started with security awareness training. I mean, security awareness training is effective and it's very inexpensive. So I would say just get started, improve, iterate each day, try to be a little bit better than you were yesterday. And by the end of the year and 5 years from now, you'll have made meaningful improvements.
Yeah, you took both of my
Oh,
examples.
no.
So
All right. Well, that's why
I
we're
was gonna
business
say
partners. We think alike.
exactly. No, but yeah, like we get customers that like, hey, I needed compliance yesterday, right? Well, you knew you needed it. You know it's a long journey. You're still waiting for what? We understand these things, right? Like it happens, but at least you've taken a step, whereas somebody is still just waiting for something to happen, right? Yeah, like Don mentioned, there's different ways to become more proactive with this, and they can start off small and then develop these habits until it sticks.
Yep. So, to our audience who are compensation team leaders and finance professionals and HR professionals, what's an immediate action that they could take right now to assess their vendors for security?
Yeah, I think like, every one kind of first thinks that, hey, this does not belong to me. I'm in accounting, I'm in finance, I'm in, something that's not IT, right? So why should I care? And so this is a mindset that we have to change, right? It's a security culture needs to be the entire company, right? That is being proactively aware of what's going on. The vendors that I work with, I'm bringing into the table. I need to make sure that I'm scrutinizing them, and it's not just IT that's scrutinizing them. Yes, I want to work with this vendor, but if IT ultimately determines that this vendor is not someone I want that the company should work with, then I have to accept that, right? And then move on and find someone that is going to be more cooperating. So
I'd
these
also
are
add,
some
if you look at the finance side, understanding that security is not just a cost center, that it also has the ability to meaningfully improve your organization, that the investments in compliance frameworks like ISO 27001 and SOC 2 are also ways to improve operational efficiency and mature the organization. So, accounting folks are budgeting for these kind of things, so we need their buy-in to make sure that these things are appropriately budgeted. And then on the HR side, there's tons of overlap between HR and compliance. Background checks are critical. The way employees are onboarded and offboarded are a big part of cybersecurity, making sure that stuff's taken care of. So I would say there's a lot of overlap between IT and accounting and finance and HR.
Yeah, I completely hear you that it needs to be an overhaul of how we think and what our mindset is about security, because it is everybody's issue. It's not just one department's.
Yeah, and then even things as simple as security awareness training, that's typically managed by HR. Having employees acknowledge the policies and procedures, that's also typically managed by HR. So there's a lot of overlap, especially with HR.
Yeah.
Yep. And especially for small businesses, right? You might not have a lot of these processes documented down, and so hopefully by the end of not the end of the journey, but you would have a more mature process that's operationalized now, right? That is repeatable, that is ingrained in how you do things. And so these are the things that we try to establish and try to build, especially going into the first year. And then we check to see if these things are repeated and they're being followed.
Okay, so we covered a number of different things on this episode so far. We talked about vendor security risks, compliance blind spots, and the hidden costs of a security breach. In the next episode, we'll be tackling an even bigger conversation: cybersecurity amidst the AI revolution. We'll be addressing how AI is changing security for the better and for the worse, the risks that companies need to be aware of, and what the future of cybersecurity looks like in an AI-driven world. John and Tim, thank you so much for this insightful conversation so far, and I'll see you guys in part 2.
Thank you.
Thank you.